Atheists.
Hi.
Thanks for clicking on this video. It means a lot to me, really. I'm a religious guy who's devoted my life to a God you don't believe in.
So you generally make good use of your time then?
So you're taking a bit of a risk here that I might insult you, make you feel bad about your life, or at the very least, waste your time.
Well, I'm aware there's an almost inevitable risk you might say something annoyingly pedestrian, and it looks like smarminess is already a given. But beyond that, you seem to be greatly overestimating your ability to make me feel bad or rope me into watching something I don't want to. So please, just take my word for it. I'm thick-skinned enough and good enough at stopping videos I don't see a lot of risk here. Thank you for your concern, though.
I really do appreciate it, and I hope not to do any of those things here. Rather, I'd like to pose a question to you. It's a very simple question, in fact. It is more of an exhortation from me to you. This question is not meant to trick you or convert you. I don't have some super ingenious question that will somehow inspire faith in a deity.
Yeah, of course you don't. Just like none of the 100 apologists I heard before you didn't. Far from being, worried you'll turn me Christian with a brilliant question, I'd honestly be relieved to see you rise to the level of saying something that's not mundane, recycled, and totally confused about the basics of atheism. Maybe I'm overreacting and maybe this is just your way of being nice. But this thing where you infantilize us by implying we're utterly vulnerable to you and then assuring us you won't take advantage of that vulnerability is not only obnoxious but kind of creepy. And your syrupy southern fried bless your heart way of doing it just makes it worse. If you want to talk to us like we're grown-ups.
I'd rather just like to challenge you. You say that you're an atheist, that you don't believe in gods, and I just want to know one thing. Are you a good one? Are you a good atheist?
Okay, so speaking of infantilizing, now he's expressing some kind of fatherly-sounding concern over whether I'm a good atheist. As if I might have just been floating around never having considered what kind of atheist I am until an actual real-life priest alerted me to the possibility that I should think about being a good one. I mean, maybe I'm reading too much into this, but just imagine if I'd made a video being like, I just want to challenge you. You say that you are a Christian, that you believe in God, and I just want to know, are you a good Christian? Doesn't that just sound incredibly patronizing, especially approaching the Christian community as an atheist? God, give people a little credit. But beyond that, it's just a weird question. As an atheist, I'm just a person who doesn't believe in God. In fact, you just defined me that way yourself. So why are you asking if I'm a good person who doesn't believe in God? Why not just ask if I consider myself a good person and leave it at that? I mean, it would sound weird if I ask you whether you're a good person who doesn't believe in vampires, right? That's because you recognize that the simple fact that someone proposes a supernatural phenomenon doesn't in any way make the quality of you as a person hinge on your disbelief in it. This might sound like a nitpicky point, but the fact that you approach us asking whether we're good people who don't believe in your favorite thing, and even consider this a form of exhortation, seems to indicate you think either that your favorite thing is so foundational to the quality of a person's character that it bears explaining how non-believers manage to be good without it, or that it's so compelling that people should account for how good a job they do not believing in it. So there are some unconstructive and possibly ugly presumptions behind this question, and I think it was worth bringing them to the forefront before moving on.
It's a question that I ask with two things in mind. The first being related to morality. While religion in general, and Christianity in particular, doesn't necessarily make someone a moral person, these ways of life do necessarily demand morality of adherence. There is a particular code of life that one must live. In the case of Catholic Christianity, that code is one of peace and justice, mercy and forgiveness. It's a code that seeks to care for the poor and seek reparations for those who take advantage of the vulnerable.
Let's just stop you right there for a moment. Your code is a code of a lot of things, and peace, justice, mercy, and forgiveness are just a few of them. That's because your code's based on the assertion that God wants whatever the church says he wants and that his desires constitute morality. And since this assertion can justify literally anything, some of what your code has demanded has been good, some has been horrible, and some has been silly nonsense. Yet in spite of all this variety, you have the presence of mind to recognize that peace, justice, mercy, forgiveness, and caring for the poor have a demonstrably positive impact on the well-being of others and society. And since concern for this, rather than your code, is what truly defines morality, you isolate the few parts of your code that explicitly promote well-being and try to pass them off as the only thing your religion demands of people. Then you congratulate your religion for supposedly owning values that progressive concern for humanity actually came up with and pressured your religion into steering toward. But the fact that you can slyly sneak the nice parts of your religion's code to the forefront while shuffling its bad or silly parts off to the side does not make your code good. And it most certainly does not make it the most parsimonious or reliable path to humanitarian values. Think about why you didn't come at us boasting of Catholicism's anti-LGBTQ teachings, elaborate rituals, reliance on sacraments, or patriarchal values that have fostered and defended violations of the vulnerable, just to name a few things, and you'll recognize that the values you did emphasize are good for reasons disconnected from and often contradicted by parts of your code.
Now, Lord knows we don't always live up to our founder and have actually done some pretty atrocious things through the years, but it is our faith that at least informs us when we do these things and gives us and reminds us a moral code to live by, reminds us that it's not an option.
Recognizing the impact my actions can have on others is what guides me and tells me that decent and kind actions are non-optional. Is that not enough for you? Are you so dependent on your religion's code that you think kicking a baby to death would be an option without it? Or do you recognize that kicking a baby to death would be terrible because of the effect it would have on the baby? And would this basic obligation to the child's well-being not only suffice but actually trump the teachings of your religion if the two ever came into conflict? If not, you're a dangerous psycho. If so, the compulsion to be moral exists with or without your religion, meaning your religion is at best extraneous to and at worst a distraction from it. So why not just be decent for explicitly understood humanitarian reasons instead of trying to launder decency through your religion? Unless you're trying to sneak the more insidious parts of your code past us while parading the nice ones in front of us. And by the way, your founder, assuming that you mean Jesus, taught a lot of things other than kindness, expected cult-like allegiance of his followers, and threatened to eternally torture people who aren't explicitly thankful for the sacrifice he arbitrarily decided to expect of himself before forgiving us. So honestly, I think we're both more than living up to his example.
We must strive to be good people. Now, as someone who doesn't have this foundation, who doesn't believe in a God or adhere to a religion, there is no superstructure making this demand on your life. No one telling you how to live in certain situations.
What? What are you talking about? There are actually a lot of people telling me how to live in various situations. But two things. First, I don't need them to tell me how to behave, since I'm not 5 years old, and I instead incorporate their guidance into my growing understanding of constructive and compassionate behavior. And second, the people I take seriously give good reasons for what they tell me instead of just saying God told them I have to do things. So maybe you should ask me what superstructure makes demands of me instead of just telling me I have no such superstructure. You might just learn I actually do have one. It's just more nuanced and makes more sense than yours. But maybe that's why it's easier just to say I don't have one.
Without a belief in an afterlife, there might be a feeling that all the world is futile, so what difference does it make?
There might be a feeling that everything's futile without an afterlife, but that's not the case for me because, again, I'm not 5 years old. To start with, I understand the math of the situation well enough to recognize that a few decades of life is worth more than 0 decades of life even though it's not infinity life. Also, I'm not a sociopath, so I care about others. For example, I have enough compassion for my children that I want their lives to be good after I'm dead, even though I won't be there to see it. If you can't get your head around, or don't care about, the possibility that your behavior will continue to impact others after you're gone and thus can't see the point of anything unless you're motivated by an afterlife in which you're rewarded, then you should really spend less time fretting over how good I am and worry about yourself instead.
This, of course, does not need to be the case. Some of the world's greatest humanitarians, some of the most influential figures today promoting peace and justice efforts, are not adherents to a religion, but live morally out of a commitment to humanity, a recognition of our interconnectedness, an acknowledgement that there is something good in itself about loving one another, about sacrifice. And so I ask you, are you a good atheist? Even though there may be no eternal reward or punishment, even though you're free to do whatever you want, do you choose the virtuous path that benefits not only you, but others? I hope so.
So after having confessed that your understanding of morality is so stilted that you need commands from God to conceptualize it and the motivation of an ultimate reward to execute it, you're hopeful that we at the grown-up table are living up to our much more intelligent and altruistic reasons for decent behavior. Okay, I guess. And I didn't put it that way to be rude. That's honestly the picture you're painting. And I'm not sure why we should be taken to task by someone who admits to approaching morality the way you do. Honestly, this video is starting to sound more and more like an unintentional extended self-own.
The world needs good atheists. Now, of course, the word good points to more than just a sense of morality. It also represents an evaluation of aptitude. When I ask if you're a good atheist, I want to know if you're good at being an atheist. Do you articulate why you don't believe in God in a coherent way, or you just think that religion's dumb, so use logical fallacies? Have you explored the depths of your mind and heart, asking the real questions of life, of death, faith, and reason, seeking to understand what this human life is really about? You just not want to go to church, so this'll do.
What kind of patronizing bullshit-loaded questions are these? Asking if people are good at not believing your favorite paranormal claim is as silly as asking if they're good at not believing in Bigfoots or UFOs or vampires. And that's bad enough as is. But when half your question is, or do you just use fallacies and not want to go to church, you're being a passive-aggressive ass, and what you're doing is pretty obvious. Basically, this is a false dichotomy meant to shift the burden of proof, implying that we have to spend a lot of time pondering your unproven claim, or else we're overly dismissive, fallacious, and lazy. But this is completely backward. If you have a claim you want people to believe in, then try to convince them. Don't sit there and demand they engage in endless reflection and research before not believing what you never troubled yourself to show them. This entitled way he's approaching people is just audacious. People don't expect you to do a bunch of homework before not believing in vampires. They don't expect you to explore the depths of your mind and heart before not believing in UFOs. They don't have an expectation for how everybody in the world should articulate why they don't believe in Bigfoot. So why demand all this of people before they don't believe in your favorite thing?
Have you read the critical atheist thinkers of history? People like Nietzsche, Sartre, Feuerbach, Heidegger, people who really ask the challenging questions, who pose thoughtful insights of the world. Or just stick with people like Richard Dawkins, people who provide great sound bites for the cause, yippee, but do little to add anything to the world other than strawman arguments and divisiveness.
And here we go. The potentially endless, ever-shifting appeal to things you should have read before not believing Christians' undemonstrated claims. And he presents it once more in terms of a false dichotomy by dividing atheists into two camps, one of which has read a lot of old books that few people will likely have read, and the other that mindlessly repeats sound bites from angry reactionaries. But there's a lot of room between these two camps. Maybe a lot of people have good reasons for not believing in God without having read all or even any of those books. Maybe a lot of ideas in them have trickled down into and even been further refined by ongoing discussion within the atheist community. Maybe people don't need to fully read these books themselves to access these ideas, and you demanding that they trudge through old, imposing tomes is just an attempt at making the price of admission for being an informed atheist so high that few people will reach it, and you can try to make the rest feel silly. Maybe your list can always change so that meeting your expectations of a well-read atheist is impossible. Maybe it says a lot about your motivation that you don't ask all the people in your pews why they didn't read all these books before converting. And maybe the fact that you still think Dawkins is everybody's favorite shows that you're 5 to 10 years out of touch with the atheist community you think you're talking down to, so lecturing us about how informed we are has a massively comical boomer vibe to it. It all boils down to this simple fact. If you tell me something exists, I don't have to read a stack of books before not believing you. I bet you'd recognize that a ufologist making the same demand of you would be totally uncalled for. So the fact that you don't recognize it's uncalled for when you do it just shows how entitled you are.
Have you read for yourself the works of real theologians, people articulating our beliefs in the best way we know how? Karl Rahner, John Henry Newman, Joseph Ratzinger, Augustine of Hippo, Henri de Lubac? Or do you stick with the simplicity of evangelical pastors from some rural anti-intellectual church?
Okay, what are real theologians? A real chemist produces demonstrable results in chemistry. A real astronomer can make verifiable observations and theories about what we see in outer space. A real engineer can... Just kidding, I'm not seriously going to keep going. I know you get the point, which is that you only differentiate a real from a fake anything by how well they get tangible results. There are no tangible results in theology because nobody can show us anything about the nature of God, and thus there are no qualifications for a real theologian. So when someone like Father Kenobi here contrasts real theologians with fake ones, all he can be referring to is the people who articulated his favorite version of a made-up thing. And I really don't care who made something up in your favorite way. Until you can show me what God is and how they accurately described it, it's pointless. I also don't care who's making things up in the most interesting and articulate way, and I don't care who does it in the middle of a fancy university versus who does it over the pulpit of a country church. Sure, the second group may sound a little more rough around the edges when they do it, and the first might be more articulate about how they weave excuses. But in the end, you're both talking about an invisible disembodied spirit being you can't show me. So you don't sound smarter by as wide a margin as you think, and sometimes your elaborate obfuscating pretension sounds even dumber. Either way, throwing rural Christians under the bus like you did was kind of bullshit.
I ask all of this not to be accusatory, at least not overly accusatory, but to simply challenge you to go deeper in your thought.
You don't know how deep in thought I've gone, so don't presume to lecture me about going deeper.
Simply declaring yourself an atheist and going about your life isn't enough, just as saying you're a Christian and never reading the Bible wouldn't be enough.
No, this is just wrong. People can simply declare themselves non-believers and vampires and just go on with their lives, right? So why can't they do the same with your favorite thing? The onus is on the person who does believe in vampires, just as it should be on people who believe in invisible disembodied spirit beings.
Ask more questions. Read more perspectives.
The Christian said to the atheist without noticing the irony.
Be able to articulate your understanding of the world with logic and reasoning that will actually add something to the world. Because here's the thing. People of faith need you to be good atheists.
No. People of faith need fundamentally better epistemology. Otherwise, they would be people of something other than faith.
We do. As a Christian, I don't want you to be a bad atheist with an unexplored mind just regurgitating fallacies. I want you to ask questions that we've never thought to answer.
And I want you to stop answering questions you should still be asking.
I want you to be so smart that it challenges us to be smarter.
I want you to recognize something that should challenge you to be smarter when you see it.
As crazy as it sounds, I would much rather you be a good atheist than just an atheist.
Do you think the world is so full of just atheists that we need you to swoop in and exhort us to be good atheists? I mean, sure, let's all encourage each other to be better, but your way of going about it is just patronizing and aggressively directed toward people you disagree with.
And so that is my humble message to you, from one believer to a non-believer. We may not agree on much, but that doesn't mean that we don't need each other or can't learn something from one another. We do, and we can. Peace and good to you, Father Casey.
Yeah, it wasn't a humble message. Not at all. It was an arrogant message that talked down to us like we were children, using jabs that were all the more off-putting because you tried to hide them behind a smarmy, gentle demeanor. Look, you might be used to talking to people this way. Those in your religion might call you Father, and you might get met with such automatic deference that you start to think people are going to feel lucky when you dole out little bits of your wisdom, or smile like adoring children every time you verbally pat them on the head and bless their little hearts. But that tone doesn't come off well with those outside your religion. It doesn't soften the presumption of telling them to be moral for reasons they've internalized yet you seem baffled by, or of chiding them to study to your satisfaction before not believing what you've never demonstrated to them. The fact is that you, sir, are woefully unequipped for talking to people outside your faith. There's a massive communication barrier between you and those who speak to each other like normal, mutually respecting adults. And I hope that those who are doubting or recently out of your religion see your tactics for what they are and have the confidence not to be shamed by them. And shifting to those in my audience, you don't need to feel guilted by this kind of talk, regardless of the tone, even if it has the loving feel of a parental figure trying to guide you back to the faith as if you'd been lost. Hopefully this reply did something to help you see that, especially if this ever comes from people you know. This program was made possible by a grant from John Adams, Bob Generic, Maggie Danger, S.R. Foxley, A Little Logic, Daniel Bostet, and Q, and by the generous support of viewers like you. If you'd like to join them in pledging to this channel, please find a link to the Prophet of Zod Patreon below.